Welcome to That One Conversation, the podcast where we talk about those one conversations that have formed us into the person we are today. You know, the conversation that you never asked for, but it was given to you anyway. It was one of those conversations that changed you to your core. And in doing so, it's created a ripple effect of positive change from that one conversation. I'm Laurie Rowe, the host of this podcast. And throughout my life, I've had several of those one conversations. And as I reshare them with other people, I've always been a bit surprised at how it changes their life too. And so it's because of that I'm on a mission. My mission is to create connection, community, and change through the curation and cultivation of conversation. Join me and my guests as we share about those life-changing conversations, because these conversations might just change your life too. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of That One Conversation. Several weeks ago, I sat down with Dr. Alex Wills, who is a psychiatrist based in Idaho, and he's also the founder of PERMA Mental Health and the creator of a 5-step process towards radical emotional acceptance. And I have really enjoyed thinking back on this conversation, and I've integrated several of his tips to help me with my emotions over the last few weeks. And this has really surprised me how much of an impact it has made on my own personal mental health in a really positive way. Now, not surprisingly, the radical emotional acceptance system that Dr. Wills has developed was established because of none other than a conversation that he had years ago. And so we start the conversation talking about that, and we really dig into what radical emotional acceptance is. And stick around for the end of this episode, because I'm going to circle back and share with you a couple of the things that I've done after this interview that have really impacted my own mental health. Thanks so much for joining us today. And here we are, Dr. Wills and myself. So we were chatting a bit about how the conversation that really changed your life really set the trajectory for your career.
Yes.
And I'm really thrilled, because this is just so exciting to know that the words that somebody gifted you, the conversation that someone gave you, could really make such an impact. So set up this conversation for us. Tell us about that one conversation that changed everything for you, Alex. Where were you? What was going on in your life? How old were you? And just give us a good idea of who was Alex at that time in your life.
Yeah, I'd love to. And it might be a little bit different than what people are expecting. I had finished medical school, which was over in Israel and New York City. And then I was in my psychiatry residency training in Hawaii at the time. And in our training, we had to do a lot of psychotherapy supervision, because as psychiatrists, we don't just do, psychiatric medication management, but we also do psychotherapy. I swallowed a psychotherapy pill, in fact. I became sort of infatuated with all of the different evidence-based modalities. And so I was really kind of gung-ho about learning them all. I was, personally benefiting from a lot of these psychotherapy principles I was learning. And I was seeing, my patients, their lives were changing in positive ways. One evening with one of my psychotherapy supervisors, we had gone out for a beer to kind of catch up. And we were having a conversation. And I was actually going through a pretty tough time, feeling pretty down. I was kind of going on and on, rambling about this friendship I had. One of the other residents and myself became fast friends as soon as it started a few years previously. And we had a pretty good close friendship. However, she ended up starting to date one of the other residents. And because of that, our friendship kind of fizzled a little bit. And so I was grappling with trying to understand everything. And the supervisor looked at me right in my eyes and said, "You lost your friend and you're really sad." I even almost get a bit emotional right now talking about that, because he hit the nail on the head. He identified what happened and more importantly, my emotion. And I just sat there dumbfounded. And it's like, all of a sudden, I had like hours of things to say and I had nothing left to say. And I just sat there like, yeah, that's it. That's all that happened. That profound experience. One of the steps in my book is naming your emotion. just naming my emotion. I had some profound sadness at that moment. I lost a friend and I was very sad about it. And that in itself gave me a sense of peace to just accept that deep pain, that deep sadness. And that was one of the formative experiences that kind of led me on my pathway towards figuring out this thing I call radical emotional acceptance, and how healing that can be for not only myself, my friends, my family, but, all the patients that I work with.
He says you lost a friend and now you're sad. It sounds like your mentor, he sat with you in your emotion. He identified it. It seems really basic, but also very profound, because it sounds like in that moment, you really wanted to go on and on and on and just talk about the depths of your sadness without even labeling it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to dive into the deep Freudian analysis of what happened in my childhood, of all of these explanations and intellectualizations and rationalizations, and he just cut through all of that and said, "You're sad.
Yeah.
There's nothing more to say. You should be sad because something very
Right.
painful happened." The truth of that, and not trying to fight or fix or get rid of the sadness, was very healing in itself.
So how long ago was that conversation, Alex?
So that was back in residency, almost a decade ago now, I suppose.
Okay, so about 10 years ago. So tell us more about what happened after that, and how has that conversation that you had impacted you both personally, but then also professionally?
I went back into my life, finishing up my residency and a year of fellowship. And then I came back to Idaho to start my private practice. I continued doing psychotherapy with patients with several different modalities. And, little by little over time, as most psychotherapists become a bit eclectic, I would notice certain things that seemed to really, really work well with patients. And I noticed certain things that didn't seem to work as well. And I always was keeping track. I would be doing psychotherapy, 5 days a week for hours a day with different folks. And so that was, really my passion. Along came a book, I guess around 2016, that most people have heard of, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. I read it and I was intrigued. I thought it was clever and interesting, and I tried to apply it for myself. But something about it, after a couple months, just kind of kept rubbing me wrong. It wasn't quite gelling with some of the Buddhist-based psychotherapies that I had been taught. So I kind of revisited it, and it was an inspiration for my book, which is called Give a F, actually, a bit of a response book to the Mark Manson book, to set the record straight that, whoa, wait a minute. What if giving an F, or in other words, having emotions, is not a problem?
Unpack that for us and tell us what that looked like, how you began to interject that into your practice. I'm guessing that's what happened.
It was kind of both ways in a way. These evidence-based psychotherapies that I was kind of practicing by the book with patients. I always say my patients are really my greatest teachers, because they're the ones who tell me what really works in their life and what doesn't work. So I'm constantly learning what really helps people where the rubber meets the road. Not just all of these heady concepts, but actual coaching and making their lives better. As my patients and the psychotherapies were sort of teaching me, I was also starting to formulate what I think of as like the 5 diamond principles that are very helpful for people to have a better relationship with their own emotions, specifically the so-called negative emotions, the painful emotions, the unpleasant emotions.
So tell us about how this has become a book and walk us through the radical emotional acceptance concept that you really developed and what that looks like.
So the subtitle is Reclaim Yourself with the 5 Steps of Radical Emotional Acceptance. I formulated it into 5 steps so people can make it very real in their lives and actually practice it and really get something out of it to be life-changing. The first step is to drop the F shield, or realize that we have what we call shield emotions that protect us from deeper, more vulnerable emotions. The classic example is anger. Anger is a very easy shield emotion to get in touch with, because when you're angry, nobody's going to mess with you because you're going to kill them. You're very empowered. However, underneath or behind that anger, usually or almost always, our more painful, vulnerable emotions: fear, hurt, pain, disappointment, fear of loss, abandonment. And so we want to get in touch with these deeper ones, which leads us to the next step, which is to name the emotion. Just simply name the raw emotion: sad, happy, scared, hate, disgust, whatever it might be. The third step is to listen to the emotion, try to learn what that emotional data, that emotional truth is trying to teach you. The fourth step is to act on the emotion or not act. Oftentimes, we don't need to do anything ultimately, but with our emotional wisdom and emotional data, we can make the best choice about what to do next, to be proactive and to have positive direction. And my favorite step is the final one, which is have gratitude, or thank the F. Have gratitude for the emotion, because once you realize that all of your emotions are only there to help you, all of the painful emotions, the scary emotions, the unpleasant emotions, they're all trying to help you. And if you can find sincere gratitude for them, there no longer is a problem.
Yeah. Wow. That's a gift too, when you can really have gratitude for the emotion that you're feeling. Now, I think that there's an assumption that these 5 steps are all going to be kind of what would be considered a negative emotion. I feel sad. I feel let down. I feel discontent. Is the same true for positive emotions?
Absolutely. It's very fun to practice radical emotional acceptance with the positive emotions, or the joyful, happy, feel good emotions. Usually those aren't so much of an issue because people like those emotions. So they're not having to, take steps to accept them and to enjoy them. However, using the steps for that is pure joy for sure.
Before, when we were talking, I was telling you that some of the things that I had learned in reading about your work that really fascinated me, I'd love to dig in a little bit more, because I think it's really, really helpful for everyone, but for those listening today. Would you say that working with our emotions as opposed to against them is how we should begin to live our lives? And what does that look like? We've got the 5 steps. Could we use like maybe anxiety? Is that an emotion? I'm feeling anxious about my job. I'm feeling like I don't know if this is where I'm supposed to be, and it's kind of consuming me. Could you walk us through, like, how do we work with those emotions and use them for good?
Absolutely, and that's a great example to talk about. I think it's pretty common. I think most of us work, and most of us wonder and have some anxiety about our jobs or our careers, whatnot. I find it helpful to think of anxiety as a manifestation of fear. The emotion of fear. If we ask ourselves the question, why is fear good? How is fear, trying to help me? Then we can start to become curious about what it's doing for us. One helpful tool is to ask ourselves the opposite. Well, what if I didn't have any fear at all? Let's say that we're stuck in a dead end job and that we're not satisfied. It's not going in the right direction, but we didn't have any fear at all. Well, might be just the kind of person who will just stay in that job forever. Maybe at the end of our lives regret it. The absence of fear might show us, wow, that might lead me down a bad path. Fear is actually trying to help me pay attention and maybe make the best choices for my desires, for my own passions, for my own emotional needs.
That's really good, because I've been in corporate America. My husband's in corporate America. We've all worked with individuals, maybe our first year on the job, we meet them and we learn they've been there for 35 years. And we're like, what? Like, I wasn't even born when you started working here. And that may be because there's like a false sense of security, or that lack of curiosity. What else could I be doing? Listening to perhaps the idea that maybe this isn't right for me and it's okay, but not being in tune with that could really lead you down a career where it could have been better and you didn't even know that. So I love that, how you basically are able to spin fear isn't bad. Fear is, let's be curious about the fear. Why do I have the fear? Now you can go down that road of like, well, what if I lose my job? Well, what if you do? Right? Like, or what if they don't like me? Or, I mean, there's all sorts of different routes to the fear. But ultimately, I think what you're saying is ask what good can come from this fear that wouldn't be there if I wasn't asking myself that.
What we typically do is we start war with ourselves. We tell ourselves, "Ooh, I don't like that fear. It doesn't make me feel good. So how can we get rid of that fear?" And the fear is sitting there thinking, "Hey, I'm just trying to help you. I'm trying to work with you." And we're like, "No, you're bad. You make me feel unpleasant. So I'm going to try to medicate you away. I'm going to try to get rid of you." An example that's going on right now for me is I have a couple situations running my own business that have my emotional radar has been picking up a very, very intense amount of fear. Now, in the past, I would have tried to avoid it, meditate, ignore it, or fix it. However, because I'm trying to practice what I preach using radical emotional acceptance, I'm accepting that I have a very intense amount of fear going on right now. And the alchemy can transmutate that fear into passion, motivation, energy, because there's a lot I need to pay attention to because of the situation. So I can use that as my energy to actually take some proactive steps to do what I need to do to basically stay safe and to have a good outcome. So I'm so grateful for my intense fear because without it, there might be a really bad outcome because I wouldn't have the energy or motivation to do what I need to do.
Oh, I love that. There's already so many applications in my own life that I'm thinking about. You've talked about it from a business context and we talked about it from an employer or, as an employee. It really affects our relationships with spouse, children. I'm thinking about a conversation I had with my 14-year-old son last night. It was a rather mature conversation. It was actually like him kind of owning up and saying, "Hey, I'm actually becoming a man and I want to be the best man I can be. Like I want to be a leader." And I was like, who is this child that I'm talking to? I know that there have been a couple of incidences recently that ignited some fear in him and some disappointment. And it has caused him to reflect and go, okay, if I continue down this path, then I see my life going this direction. But that's not okay with me. I'm actually going to tell him about this conversation because I think that the process that he's explaining to me is really mature for a 14-year-old, and I'm really proud of him. What you're saying, though, makes so much sense. And I love this. You can allow it to affect every aspect of your life for the good. I love that. So there's a couple other things that you talk about in your book. You talk about how emotions are like colors. So I'd love for you to explain this and what that means.
I often joke, with folks who seem to really kind of get it and start to click and see the applications and everything. It only cost me $500,000 and about 10 years of my life, which is true with all of the medical school debt and everything. But it's hard fought pearls of wisdom to have. And so it makes me so happy that it can help other people. It did take quite a bit to put this together, so to speak.
I want to pause because I have another guest that I interviewed recently who's in higher ed. My father has been in higher ed. He has 3 doctorates. And my father-in-law, PhD. My husband has a JD. I've done graduate work. We highly value education. And it's just interesting that you mentioned that because a lot of people would hear, $500,000 of debt and they would be like, I'm not going to college. And yet they miss the whole point, right? That college, graduate work, pursuing a calling that you have in your life is a journey. And guess what? It costs money to have that journey. And I cannot tell you how much I preach about the absolute value of higher education. And what's interesting is that for the work that you've done on radical emotional acceptance, you had to have all of that experience, but you also had to have that conversation. Like it's a combo. It just all works together. So back to colors and emotions.
I find it really helpful. Patients seem to really get it when we talk about how if you think of emotions literally as a sixth sense, just like colors are one of our 5 senses. If you look over here, blue happens to you. If you look over here, green happens to you. You're just picking up the color wavelengths. It's just some kind of a data, right? We don't walk around saying, oh, there's negative colors and there's positive colors. And, what, today I'm not going to see red. Red doesn't exist in my world. There's no red. I'm not going to even think about red. We would be gaslighting ourselves and making ourselves crazy. Yet we do that with emotions all the time. We try to pick and choose what emotional data we're going to let in. So if you think of it like colors, I think about my relationship with so-and-so, and I have love and joy happen to me. Then I think about my relationship with this other person, and I have hate and confusion and fear happen to me. And it's all good. It's giving us emotional truth so that we can make the best decisions about our relationships and situations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the idea that it is a sixth sense, in addition to what we see, what we hear, etc., makes a lot of sense as well. I'm going to call that a tool in our toolbox to have.
I would literally say that there's many, many situations where if you only have your five senses and your logical brain, you cannot make the best decision if you do not take your emotional data into account. Your emotional data is giving you unique data that you cannot get from anything else. And if we just try to control that and push that away and not give a F, we're just doing that to our own detriment.
You raised a question in my mind that I'd like to see if we could explore just a little bit. I am an extremely intuitive person. I'm relational, I'm extroverted. I rely a lot on my gut, my intuition. I wouldn't describe myself as an overly emotional person. I'm pretty even kill in terms of like the balance of emotions. Do I get sad? Yeah. Do I have emotions? Absolutely. My husband is very logical. Often he will choose to suppress emotion because it doesn't make sense logically. And I know he's not the only person that does that. How do you help your clients that I assume also have logic more than intuition? How do you help them tap into that?
I love working with men, men's mental health. There's such a stigma about it. More and more, we're seeing men start to become emotionally woke and realize that, hey, I can be masculine, I can be manly, I can, be myself, and my emotions don't have to be a problem. And then that also coincides with people who may be more kind of logically minded. The using emotional data as an analogy is very helpful for guys and girls out there who, think more logically, think about computer programmers and stuff. They love working with data. So if they can start to see their emotions as, hey, this is more data that can help me, then they can really take that and run with it.
That's very good insight into someone that is less intuitive and more logic based. Is there anything else that you feel like we haven't really touched on?
An important concept that kind of came to me, I mean, there's so many. I mean, I could talk your ear off for hours. One is for every unpleasant, painful, fearful emotion, for any of those icky emotions that we would rather not experience, there's a flip side, which is a desire. I like to think of desires as a category of emotions. Desires to get your personal emotional needs met, desires to have ice cream, desire to have love, intimacy, connection, to have an amazing bond with your partner, trust. So every time we have a difficult, painful, unpleasant emotion, we could always ask ourselves the question, what's the desire? What's my desire? What emotional need do I want or need that I'm not getting met right now? And so that's another helpful kind of tool.
So, just to use the work analogy, I'm feeling anxiety in my work. I'm feeling fear that they're going to let go of me, or I'm feeling fear that I'm not doing enough and they're not pleased with my work, and therefore I don't have job security. That seems like a pretty natural fear. How would you turn that into a desire?
Yeah, so the flip side of what you don't have, if you're in a work position where you don't have high confidence that you're valued, that you have job security, that it's going to be leading you to a bright future, those are the things you want. You want that trust, you want that hope, you want that security, you want that sense of trust with your boss or whomever, that you're going to work hard and they're going to reward you for it. You can depend on that. So then you take creative steps to move towards those desires, whatever that means for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, taking the source of that negative emotion and then looking at the converse of that and asking, how do I get from over here where I feel negative to over here where my desire is that's causing that negative emotion?
Yeah, and then being thankful for those so-called negative emotions, because without those you wouldn't have the motivation or the desire to get over here. They're making you aware of what's missing so you can creatively move towards what you want, so that you're no longer living without those emotional needs. Think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid. That's a good reference to making sure we're getting all of those basic and then higher needs met.
As I've listened to you discuss the work that you've done, I want to ask you, if you had never had that mentor that said to you, you've lost a friend and now you're sad, what trajectory do you think your life would have been on?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I guess I really don't know because that had quite a large impact on me for sure. I would like to think that through everything I've done that I would maybe have ended up here anyhow. Yeah, I'm really thankful for that because that did hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was that emotional experience and that epiphany moment that really changed everything. So it's priceless for sure.
I love hearing about how that one conversation that you had, it has impacted you personally, and of course, all of your immediate family relationships, I assume, with your spouse, with your children, and then in your practice, how you've been able to help your patients slash clients now in writing this book, bringing it out into the world so that it can have a larger ripple effect, and truly helping people understand that it is okay. You actually do need to give an F about those emotions and the healing, the moving forward that takes place as a result of that. So, in retrospect, or as we shift kind of into that third part of the conversation of the podcast, paying it backwards, have you gone back to your mentor, your friend that gave you the gift of this conversation? And if so, tell us about that.
I think I did, thank him at the time. It was really helpful. I do remember at that moment. But, meeting you and getting to know your work and your podcast, I definitely am inspired to call him up and to let him know. I did vaguely mention him at the end of the book under the, gratitude section. Yeah, I'm excited to give him a call and just, let him know a little bit more personally.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think that, when I started the podcast and was beginning to really conceptualize how I wanted this to look and sound and feel, and someone said to me, "How do you know you've been successful in this podcast?" My response, after I thought about it for a little while, was, I want to be able to walk into a coffee shop. And as I go up to get my coffee, I want to overhear people talking at a table about their own conversations. I want this to be such a movement of people that are willing to say, this is what changed me, or be willing to say, how did you become the person you are today? And to be open to going back and expressing that gratitude as well. I've been surprised already at the number of people that have reached out to me and shared with me that this idea of sharing the one conversation that changed their life, how it has already deepened their relationships, brought forth conversation that they never even would have had with their spouse. One friend was in Mexico with she and her partner, and then they were with another couple, and she said, I listened to your first episode, and that evening we just all sat there over dinner and talked about our conversations. And she said it was such a rich conversation to learn about this. And so I do hope that you'll go back and you'll express gratitude to this gentleman. And I know that as you process your own emotions, you've been able to quickly get to gratitude with him. And what a gift that is, and a tenderness in that relationship. And, he's probably one of those people that you don't see, but maybe every decade. And yet you can pick up where you left off and have that amazing, deep conversation. Can you let us know how people can find you? I know that you have a website. Tell us about where people can find you and your work and learn more about the radical emotional acceptance.
Yeah, radicalemotionalacceptance.com has information about me, the book. There's a little shop now for some fun Give a F merchandise if anybody's interested. Starting a Give a F podcast soon. Simon and Schuster is distributing the book, so it's available anywhere in the world that English books are sold. So I'd be excited to connect. People can reach out and leave their information if they'd like to connect. And thank you so much for having me on. This has been amazing, and I resonate with your value of gratitude. And I think that that's something, just it really makes our own lives so much better to be able to live a life where we find gratitude, even for the painful or difficult things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this has been such a great conversation as well. I've really enjoyed it, Alex. I do have one last question. If somebody was wanting to work with you, are you limited to working with just Idaho residents?
We can make something work out, definitely. Yeah, we can figure things out.
So you do maybe telehealth?
We do telehealth. As far as, officially treating somebody as a patient, there may be difficulties because, of state licensure issues. There's also possibly opportunities to do some non-psychotherapy kind of consultation things that wouldn't be considered doctor-patient relationship stuff.
I really hope that you enjoyed the conversation that I had with Dr. Wills. Included in today's show notes, you'll find all of the contact information for him, as well as information about his new book. I told you at the beginning of this episode that I would circle back around and share with you a couple of the things that I learned from our conversation and how I've implemented them into my own life. And so I wanted to share those with you in hopes that they would be helpful to you as well. The first thing is this idea of sitting in our emotions. And by nature, I'm not a super emotional person. I am not someone that really does dwell a lot on my emotions. Through the course of this conversation, as well as some nudging from my husband, I've really become much more deliberate about sitting in my emotions, pausing when I feel something and asking myself, what do I feel? Why do I feel this? And beginning down the train of asking, what's it for? What's it drawing me towards? What's it taking me away from? And just exploring, what does it mean? As it relates to this idea of sitting in our emotions, I had a conversation just this week with one of my daughters. She was grappling with some disappointment, and she was very sad. And she is someone that likes to hide behind her emotions. No idea where she learns that. As I was talking with her and trying to comfort her, this conversation that I had had with Dr. Wills came back into my head. I sat there with her and I said, honey, it's okay that you feel sad about this situation. And I just stopped talking. And tears began to just flood down her face. And I held her hand and I held her and I said, it's totally okay to be sad. This is normal. The emotion that you feel is normal and it's okay to feel this. And I'm here with you. I'm here to hold you and I'm going to be here with you on the other side too. I was so surprised. I don't know why I would be surprised, but I was surprised that by me giving her permission to express her emotion, to be sad, she felt free to do that. And in doing so, she deeply expressed her emotion and released it from her body. So sitting in our emotions is something that I've really taken to heart over these last few weeks. But the other thing that really struck me in this conversation, and I've actually shared it with some people after talking with Dr. Wills, is this idea that our emotions could be a sixth sense. You know, we have sight, hearing, taste, touch, and what's the other sense? And the idea that we perceive everything through our senses. And so if you were to add the sixth sense, and if it were to be emotion, how does that change everything? How does that change the way that you perceive a situation or how you perceive what is going on internally and externally? So really dwelling on that and tapping into the sixth sense of emotion has also benefited me lately. And finally, I would just say that the idea of an emotion being like a color, it's just there. It is what it is. It's not positive. It's not negative. It's a part of life. And we name it and we experience it. We sit in it. We let it teach us and we grow from it. I hope this episode really brought to light the importance of tapping into our emotions. I hope you'll go purchase Dr. Wills' book. I also hope that as you think about the conversations in your own life, that you will share them with other people, that you will ask people about those one conversations that truly changed their lives, and that we'll all grow as we cultivate these conversations.